graphs seems to be a reasonable interface for augmentation reasoning, right? I think that I should, well, I'm quoting rightfully Tom Gordon when he said that what we are doing is reasoning on top of a graph. I agree, I think that this is true, but I think that is not all the truth. In the sense that what was the last time you received an argument in the form of a graph outside academia? Does it mean that there are no arguments in the real world, only in academia? I think that most of the arguments out there are in natural language, and that's why we now have the field of argument mining, because we want to move from natural language into something that is formal. And then when we have something formal, we have a graph, and everybody's happy. But why we are not moving back to natural language? I mean, I'm not saying that the graph is useless. The graph is extremely powerful, and it's probably the best interface for some applications or for some audience. But if you have a different audience, then you might have to have a different medium. So what we did some years ago is, okay, you can have interfaces using natural language to something that is formalized behind in some way. But it's hard to evaluate when you have, for instance, a list of pro or a list of cons. What are you going to ask to somebody, whether they are convinced whether the pro are winning or the cons are winning? We tried a slightly different approach, and I would like you to open again your browser, because we are going to use them. And so I would like you to read this piece of text, and then going on your browser and answer the questions that you see there. And this is the result. Let me close a little of things. %, we conclude that tomorrow will be cloudy but not rainy, and 4% will say that tomorrow will rain, and 17% says I don't know. There is another question associated to the same scenario. If you see your browser now, there is a different question which is asking you how relevant is the statement that BBB is more accurate than AAA for your conclusion. And you can answer something between 1 and 7, where 7 is really important, and 1 is, well, that's actually completely irrelevant. And these are the results. And well, if you look at this as an histogram, you can see that there is a distribution towards has a large impact, knowing there is a preference between the two of them. Now, this is the first of 4 small exercises, so I hope I will not bother. I'm not annoying you too much, but trust me, there is a reason for that. So there is basically the same exercise, but with a different text. This is the text. So, just in time for one of them. So, this was the distribution we had before, for the example of the weather forecast, and this is what we get now. Sounds pretty similar, right? Okay. And once again, the same second question is how much one specific statement was playing a role, was relevant, or had an impact in your decision. And the fact is, the statement is BBC is a mechanic who has been recommended to you by a friend. So this was the result, the distribution of in the case of the weather forecast. And now we have instead this distribution. Don't know whether repeating the example is changing something. It generally does, because you are starting getting training. Right, so what is going on behind there? You have an argument for a conclusion, an argument for another conclusion, and you have basically a preference in both cases. But now what happens if I'm giving you a slightly different text? We are coming back to the domain of weather forecast. The first part is the same text I gave you before. This is not a trick. You can read it, you cannot read it, it's the same text. And then there is an added part which is in red. And, well, let's see the results. I don't know. Which means that the majority of you are having their own brain and more skeptical semantics when you cannot conclude much. And once again, the same question on what was the importance of the first sentence, that BBC is more accurate than AAA. BBB, sorry, is more accurate than AAA. It's still in the text. There is still this piece of text here that says BBC is more accurate, BBB is more accurate than one of AAA. So the question is, how is important this specific statement for the final decision? The opposite case. You basically say, yeah, that is definitely not the case. Just for the sake of completeness, let me show you also the extended case for the other domain, and that will be the last few polls I will ask you to fill in. And this is the text. So it's like the same before, and then you had another part at the bottom, and now you can vote. Which is something that I didn't anticipate at all. And just for the sake of the completeness, then there is also how much was knowing that the mechanic was recommended by you by a friend, relevant for your conclusion, between a scale between 1 and 7. So exactly the same example before. And the results are instead this one quite conventional. So majority are just ignoring the first part. Somebody might actually still using in some way. All of us are working in argumentation. So I suppose that all of you have seen behind the scenes what is behind that. Both cases were technically coming from something that could be formalized in the same way. And we actually started not from the text in our experimentation, but we started from a formal thing. It was just this one, very extremely simple. You have a conclusion C, you have a conclusion not C, and then you have a preference for one over the other. Extremely simple. And then we just created text. Handwritten. There is no automatic generation system behind yet. It is completely handwritten and checked by native English speakers. well, what we had in that situation, and it was just written down in a way that it seems to be as close as possible to user experience. So if you have something like this, basically you can start. This is a representation from a Dung's perspective, but we actually started from an instantiated version, which is well, it is a precursor of Aspic Plus. This is the approach provided by Henry Praken and Sartor in 1997. And I really like this approach for one specific reason. You can write preferences among rules as the conclusion of an argument, of a rule itself. So you can actually express arguments in favor of preferences in the object language directly. And so basically we started from this one. You have something supporting a specific conclusion unless there is some exception. And then you have another statement supporting the opposite conclusion unless of an exception. And then you have a preference, always the same preference between one rule over another rule. That's it. And then you can go back and have the Dung framework I showed you before. Well, the extended Dung's framework I showed before. And then we explore the extended cases. The extended case is when something is reinstating the first rule, right? Something is changing the weight in the sense that you are no longer just considering the preference to decide whether one or another, but there is an additional piece of information, another piece of information coming in, and the idea is to try to reinstate the first conclusion somehow. So in one case, we analyze the direct, we consider a rebuttal of the opposite conclusion. I didn't show you this example. In another case, we had an opposite preference. And this is the case you saw before. So an undercut, a direct defeat of the preference. And we consider different domains. We consider weather forecast, a political debate. At that time was not the Brexit, but was the Scotland referendum. Use case SEA, you saw that, and romantic relationship. And romantic relationship, just to be extremely clear, is just you are dating a person since a long time, and then you're questioning whether you would like to continue in a more serious relationship, and you're asking for a friend, for a suggestion. So you have either to not going for a longer relationship or to go, and then now you have a preference given by an external person, let's say so. And what we did is exactly use Amazon Mechanical Turk to ask people exactly the question I asked you. The only difference is a single person saw just one case, either a base case or an extended case for a specific domain. So either one of the tasks you did that today, not the 4 of them, just one of them. So you could not just reuse your memory all over again. And we clearly filtered some of the results. So we asked for a basic proficiency in English with a closed test, which is a pretty standard way to discriminate between somebody who can read English or not. And what I'm going to show you is basically the results behind our little study. So this is what you saw before, weather focus, for instance. And we actually mapped the arguments in terms of statements. And this is basically the representation that we had. So we had an argument for will rain tomorrow, another that will not rain, and the third one that is the preference one over the other. And then the added part is going to be a way to somehow reinstate A1, either in a skeptical way or in a more credulous way. So in this case it would be more credulous because you remove this preference, which means that you should probably have 2 extensions in the Parker and Sartor approach, there were no preferred extensions, but there were stable extensions. And in this case, both A1 and A2 together with A4 will be a stable extension. So the participant had to basically agree with AAA or with BBB, or say I don't know, and then try to give us a statement between 1 and 7 on what was the importance of having some preference written in the text. And our hypotheses were fairly relaxed and fairly reasonable, I think, that in the base cases, so without the added value, the added piece of text, the majority participants would agree with the BBB statement, so they will follow the preference. In the extended cases, the majority of participants will agree that they cannot conclude anything from the text. And the third hypothesis, the majority of participants who view a base case scenario will agree with the preference argument and find it more relevant rather than the people with in the extended cases. And the hypotheses were satisfied, even from a statistical point of view. So if we aggregate the results from all the participants from all the scenarios all together, we have that these white boxes are the base cases, and the dashed crossed boxes are for the extended cases, which means that the majority of people in the base case agreed with BBB, and the majority of people in the extended case agreed with undecided. But which is fine, and but is unsatisfactory, and we also well, in the sense that if we start breaking down the results for domain, scenarios, and extended cases, this is the picture. So for the domain of weather, 50% of the people agreed with BBB. 45% say, I don't know. And in the extended cases, instead, 63% of people said, I don't know. But if we look instead just to the base case for now, between weather forecast and buying a car, which is exactly what you did today, technically, from a formal point of view, we started from the same idea behind, and there is no much difference, at least from a formal point of view. But people, well, in this case, nobody said, I agree with AAA, while somebody for the weather forecast said that it will rain tomorrow. And the majority, the majority of people going for BBB is much higher than the case of the weather forecast, which means that the undecided are much less. So we look a little more into this one, and in Mechanical Turk we also ask people to write in a free text way or reason or what they think that was relevant for them to make this decision, and which is basically what we were discussing before. And I aggregated those answers in 3 different classes. This is extremely opinable way to aggregate these results, but it was just to show one thing, that, well, in the case of weather forecast, it looks that the most of the comments to say, well, I actually don't know, was in favor of something that is domain specific. Is weather, you will never know. This was the type of comments associated to that. But for the used car sale, the majority of people were saying, I don't have enough information. I need more information. Otherwise, I cannot conclude anything between buying or not buying. It's not enough what you are giving me. And this is coming towards something that we were discussing before. So is weather, like I think, yeah, you mentioned before, it's always weather. You don't know very much what you can do. But there is also another couple of things that one can highlight. First of all, before going into this one, if we look at the Romance relationship domain that I didn't show you into details the text, but I want to pick up just because of something we were discussing before. Here we basically have the situation where you have to decide whether to start a long-term relationship with somebody, and a friend is say, I think that he is saying that is probably not the right person for you, something like this. And then in the extended cases, you have another friend who is telling you that the first friend who gave you a preference was very fond of you. He or she might have a hidden agenda. So it was a sort of weird situation where should you use the preference, should you not use the preference. And in the extended cases, for all the others, the majority agreed with undecided. For the romance relationship, although in the base case, everybody, well, the majority agrees with the suggestion you receive from your friend, in the extended cases, the majority said, we start the romantic relationship. And the comments behind that was, I just don't care, or given that it's an undecided situation, I will just go with I think that my own feeling will be better than what I know about the preference, which is similar to what you were saying about the used car sale. So if you have that the preference of the mechanics is no longer the case, then you are applying your own level of values, and then you are going one direction or another, because at that point you feel free to decide for your own, which is something we actually experienced in this. So what we actually realized is we started in a very naive way, and I have no problem to admit it. But we thought it was easier. Come on, we have 2 arguments and 1 preference. How difficult could it be, right? And we just didn't ask technically whether they want to invest £12,000 in a car. We just say what you can conclude from this piece of text. I agree that for somebody this is different, because you enter the mood and say, I have either to buy a car or not, which makes difference between buying a car with £12,000 or picking up an umbrella. It's the same decision in some sense. The outcome are completely different. The value of the decision is completely different. The investment you have in the decision is completely different. And then you have the entire social aspect around the decision that both of you highlighted before, that people using, which is collateral knowledge for me at the beginning. Because I was saying, well, I just ask a very logical question. Apparently people are always using collateral knowledge in what they are making out of in any aspect of the decision. There was a question behind. We just played with the numbers at the end of the day, and we had some data collected, and we also went through a little more into a couple of statistical analysis. I mean, whether the weather domain and the buying car domain is, from a naive perspective, the same from a formal point of view. I agree with everything that has been said right now. I agree with all of them. But the perspective we were adopting was, the working assumption is the knowledge we are conveying is the same. We realize that this is not the true working hypothesis, is not a real working hypothesis. We should amend this one in future works. But if we just say we stay in that working hypothesis, even in that one, we realize that the weather forecast distribution here is not statistically different from this distribution for the extended cases. So what is telling us the Fisher test is both the results from the base case and for the extended case might come from the same distribution. In particular, from the uniform distribution, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But it's different from buying a car. So I agree that there are issues related to trust and everything else, but still, the results we have here are statistically significant from the results we have in the extended cases. In the first case, we technically cannot say that there has been an effect on adding new piece of information. So this would be an undercut of what Dov was saying before. Adding new piece of information, it might not be statistically significant. It might not make a difference statistically significant. What we also can see is that if we just look at extended cases, yes, it looks like that there is something different, and it's actually proven to be the case, once again using the Fisher test, that the domain is affecting somehow the results, or at least the 4 domains we used. If you look in the 4 rows for the extended cases, this is not coming from the same distribution. So something has happened there. What is harder to discuss? We can have intuition, exactly what we discussed right now, but we don't know what was the real cause. We don't have enough information to go and dig into that. And we don't have even the experience and the expertise for doing that. None of us is a psychologist. And if you remember, the last hypothesis was that they would actually agree with that the preference was actually useful in the base case and less useful in the extended cases. And the funny thing is that we've proven to be the case only for buying a car. So for buying a car, the median was 6.5. And for the extended cases of buying a car, the median was 4. But for the others, once again, everything might come from the same distribution. So we don't know. So although the experiment was pretty straightforward, the results are messy. The results are hard to interpret, especially they are hard to justify or hard to understand why something like this has happened. What is the collateral knowledge that users are bringing inside? What are everything else that you can have around this package? Trust, social values, everything. So there are 2 ways, I think, to address this issue. One is extremely hard, and it will last for the next 30 years, which is probably the right way to do that, and the naive way, once again. So the naive way we look at, were we actually knowing what we were doing when we built those pieces of text? So is there a programmatic way to generate text for a specific outcome or for a specific purpose? And is technically what the natural language generation area of computational linguistics is trying to address. So given what you want to say, you should try to come out with a machinery that will always come out with a reasonable piece of text. So if you, this is taken from Ramdemter slides. So I'm not a computational linguist, but you generally have speech to text, which is the area of speech recognition. Then you have text to meaning, which is natural language understanding, natural language processing, statistical or rule-based, as you were discussing yesterday, more logical formalism. And then once you have the meaning and you want to go back to text, then that is the area of natural language generation. And of course, then from text you want to go to speech, then you have the speech synthesis. But if you just look at natural language generation, what you have is, first you should think from what are your communicative goals. That is where you are planning your document, when you are thinking what your document wants to say something or not, and what has to be said in that document. And then you can start saying micro-planning in the sense that where a specific sentence should be put in a document, etc., etc. And then finally reach the surface text through linguistic realization. So whether you want to merge two sentences together, whether you want to use a connective instead of another type of connective. So if we look just at the content and what we want to express, and we go back to what was the original one, we actually didn't express what was in the logical formalism. We used antonyms, as we were discussing yesterday. So we actually said, instead of this is the argument we wanted to express, we have a piece of evidence in favor of AAA, and AAA, unless there are exceptions, is concluding C. And what we wrote is the weather forecasting service of the broadcasting company AAA says that it will rain tomorrow, period. Not therefore tomorrow should rain. And the same also for the opposite one. And we didn't even express the reasoning behind the framework. So this is just the base case, so we also expressed the preference. But we didn't say, since AAA's and BBB's conclusions are incompatible, and since BBB is more accurate than AAA, that it is reasonable to tentatively conclude that tomorrow should not rain. We didn't write this. We thought that it was intuitive. You're giving preference. It's intuitive to say that either tomorrow will rain or not. It's intuitive that if you're having a preference, then you should follow the preference, so it's giving you some piece of information additional. And it's intuitive that if you have that, then you will conclude something instead of something else. But it was not what was in the formalism. It was not what we should have expressed. We just left to the intuition of the people. We don't know what, we don't have results to see whether adding this piece of text will change something. But at the same time, I don't know whether that would be, once again, the right way to go. Because would you like to have a piece of text like this one? And now this piece of text is going to be on the left side, but it's still the same piece of text. Or would you prefer to read what is on the right side? We still don't know. It's still an open question. We still have to run a lot of experiments to see whether, first of all, people would agree that the piece of text, the two pieces of text are convey the same meaning or not. We don't know. But intuitively, one would say the second one, the right one, is more compact. I didn't do that. I mean, there are rules for generating the second one. We were discussing yesterday, for instance, about writing papers in academia. How would you structure an argument in favor of a conclusion? And one of our colleagues came out and say, well, I will start from the conclusion. And then I will express why I reached at the conclusion. It's more effective. All the books you read about how to write well are suggesting this way to do that. And it's exactly what I said here. Tomorrow will be cloud, but not raining, according to BBC. And then you say that there is another possibility, but it's known to be untrustworthy. This is also the style of writing of The Economist, or The Guardian, of the other major press, that they actually have standard rules on how to write.